Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Speaker. Once again, I'm honored to be here. More so, I'm honored to speak on behalf of the people and the communities that the One by One movement serves, ensuring that their voices are amplified. I've had the privilege to speak as a subject matter expert on gang culture, theory, and violence prevention at a number of roundtables and events on the impacts of violence, gun violence in particular. Today, I'm going to speak to you less formally than I normally would. Today, I'm going to speak to you from the heart, simply as a human being, as a person with lived experience, as a proud Canadian. Participating in these roundtables, I consistently hear statistics and reports about people who live and face a great deal of violence daily. Yet, in these settings, I rarely hear from people who are firsthand experiencing the majority of gun violence, and I feel that this is one of the reasons we are not seeing the progress we should in combating this issue. I see and hear people making a living and a name for themselves, speaking on behalf of people and the communities that they don't really know or understand for personal gain or political leverage. Some may think that's what I'm doing now, but there's a big difference between them and I. We're not the same. As many of you know, I'm a former gang member and organized crime figure in Canada and abroad. But before I was ever involved in a life of crime, I was a victim, a survivor of gun violence on a number of occasions. And I'd like to start by sharing with you a short story of the first encounter I've had involving a firearm. I was about 11 years old, playing outside with a group of friends in the southwest end of Toronto, in a Toronto public housing complex called Swansea Mews. There were a group of older guys from my neighborhood that were involved in bad things. Some of them relentlessly bullied us kids and terrorized the community. Though we were children, we had to learn to navigate and cope the best we could with this. On this day, a known gunman that hung out in my area decided he was going to fire shots at us kids above our heads just to see us run. I remember hearing the zing of bullets passing us. This was entertaining to him, because when I look back as I was running for my life, I remembered seeing him laugh. I'll never forget this day. And now, as an adult, I can look back and isolate and identify this is one of the many root cause risk factors that helped to lead me down a path of self-destruction. I tell you this story because when I think about this incident and this individual, at the time, if Bill C-21 had existed or a bill like it, would it have prevented this traumatizing experience from happening to me? I strongly say that it would not. It would not have changed anything, because I'm confident he did not use a legal firearm to shoot at us that day. This man was not a citizen of Canada. He was a hardened criminal and most definitely could not have acquired a license to legally own a gun here. Also, I'd like to tell you about a best friend of mine who was a highly respected gangster at one point in his life. His name was Durgan Cisse. After a life of crime and the many traumas he was left with due to the terrible things, the violent acts he committed, and the violence he himself endured, he sadly took his own life. I remember speaking to him the day leading up to it. He was extremely down and didn't believe that he could or was good enough to get back up again. He had made his decision and he was motivated. I wish that he was able to get the help that he needed before it had gotten as bad as it did. He did not use a firearm to take his life. The reason I told these stories is to really drive home the point that we are wasting precious time focusing on the wrong things. Through decades of data collection, we have all learned what most of the root cause risk factors are that lead society on a path of extreme violence. Let us focus on the cheaper, most logical solutions, and that is prevention. Let us get these illegal guns off our streets and treat our less fortunate better. Let us focus more on the demand and less on the supply. I'm tired, and we are tired. Thank you for listening.
I will start my questions with Mr. Wilson and his colleague. Thank you for both being here. It's an honor to finally meet you in person, and thank you for your contributions to many studies that we've had at Public Safety Committee. Mr. Wilson, when you were here last February contributing to our Guns and Gangs study, You mentioned, I'm just going to quote you, when speaking on gun control, and when we hear the phrase, it should always be synonymous with illegal gun crime and illegal gun trafficking, as over 80% of the gun violence we are witnessing is committed with illegal firearms smuggled in from the U.S. Now, you mentioned in your opening testimony that you experienced a life of crime for quite some time. Can you elaborate on that comment? How do criminals who commit gun violence, where do they get these guns from? Why do they have them? Can you just elaborate on that for the committee?
Unfortunately, at one point in my life, I was a person who was involved with importing and exporting at some level firearms into this country. And, you know, now I look at what's happening in our communities and how easily accessible they are to very young children. And I know for a fact that most of the guns that are used now are guns that are being imported. How do I know this? Because we work directly in communities with a lot of the gang-involved youth. And because of my background and my history, they speak a lot more openly with us than they would with you or law enforcement or other people. So we do a lot of poking around. We do a lot of inquiring with these young guys. And they speak openly with us. So we know, you know, maybe not the direct source, but we've challenged kids. We've had media come to us in one case to see how quickly we could resource a weapon. And it was under 2 hours. And this was by a 17-year-old boy.
So under 2 hours in certain parts of that you're talking about Toronto, you can source an illegally obtained weapon. So anyone with any criminal background could get a handgun, a legal handgun, within 2 hours. That's what you're, okay.
Within 2
And
hours.
you have had a remarkable story with the One by One movement. You completely turned around your life, and you're really saving lives and pulling people out from a life of crime. So thank you for your contribution to society in that way. We need many more Marcell Wilsons and your colleagues across the country in all of our major cities. So it's that easy to obtain an illegal weapon. How do we as policymakers, how can we possibly go about tackling that issue? How do we stop that from happening?
We've spoken quite a bit on really taking having an acute focus on the root cause risk factors. You know, the motivations behind why a child or a person would even want to pick up a gun. You know, and if we can tackle that issue, then we can focus a lot less on the tools of destruction. I mean, for myself, you know, I had experiences and certain things that happened to me that led me up, that built me up to wanting to react. I was angry due to certain social issues that were going on in my neighborhood. I was angry that I grew up in I guess what would be considered an impoverished neighborhood, and had to see, you know, the fancy houses and condominiums right across the street from me, and wondered why I couldn't have or acquire these things. So there are so many layers to the before a murder happens that I think we need to really invest in, opposed to focusing on the tool itself.
So attacking the root problems of poverty and crime and investing our resources there. Would you say that the gun trafficking is related to drug trafficking at all?
They're directly linked, absolutely.
Are firearms used sort of defend drug turf and enforce sort of gang rules? Is that what they're used for?
100%. 100%.
Thank you. And so when we're looking at Bill C-21, it does many things, but one of them is to focus on freezing any new legal, lawfully owned firearm ownership of handguns. Currently we have trained, tested, and vetted people who go through a very rigorous process can get a restricted license and purchase a handgun. So it's focusing on those individuals. So do you think that focusing on those individuals will have any impact on what you're seeing in Toronto with the gang elements with guns? Like, how do you see this bill meeting that need at all?
Well, from my direct experience, I don't recall ever there being a time that we had resourced any gun legally, and any of the guns that may have been from a legal source was due to a robbery or them being taken. But that was also a very rare occurrence. So I don't see how in any way, and I mean, before I've come here, I've spoken to our youth. I've spoken to guys that are currently in prison, and we always pose the question, do you think something like this would help us? You know, banning of any type of legal firearm, and the answer is 100% always the same. You know, we've never used legal firearms or sought out to. You know, it was much easier to get them illegally.
Thank you. Thank you very much.